So, in following our course outline, we worked to submit our first exercise today, and we are now getting introduced to our next exercise, exercise 2. So that is why for today, the new unit that is introduced is unit 3 in actions, even though we were still finishing up unit 2. Now, this also tells us a little bit about what we're talking about today. Last class, we talked about digital image mining and compositing layers, and then we finished up some of those skills today with exercise 1. Today, I'm introducing the idea of shapes rather than lines, right, as a design concept. Fonts is a misused word, but what people mean by it is typefaces. Typefaces are letter designs. Those are vector shapes. And so this will also be introducing us to the way you could do type design. Composition, graphic design, we touched on that a little bit with our presentation critique of your cartoon jumbles and what makes an ideal cartoon jumble, but that's going to play into how you layer shapes together as well for shape composition. And this introduces us to vectors, not just pixel-based images, but vector-based shapes. And then we're going to work on this, introduce it, and we're going to turn them in next class. Now, where do we see shapes that are used like typefaces in communication in our digital age all the time? We see them as emojis, right? Emojis are vectors just like the letter T in Times New Roman typeface is a vector. But emojis have multiple colors, where type doesn't usually, though you can design color type as well. So to explore this, let's get into the course, and let's look at our unit module for Unit 3, which will introduce us. By no means will it make us fully understand vectors or vector shapes, but it introduces us to them. And we always start with a description of everything and some past student examples, right? So we are making our own custom emojis here. And the default theme is to make an emoji of your own design that represents the thing that you made a cartoon jumble of, right? So if it was Marvel Comics, you get to pick what kind of Marvel comic emoji you want to make. Or if it was Where the Wild Things Are, you get to choose what kind of Where the Wild Things Are emoji you want to make. And you can maybe recognize these are from some certain books. This one's from Lord of the Flies. This one's from The Hate You Give, that kind of thing. The Hate You Give isn't anyone's favorite children's book, but it's a banned book anyway. So what are we learning? We're going to review the basics of shape tool modification using transform options. We've already used transform options. We're going to be using those same options, but we're going to be using them on shapes rather than lines. And now these shapes are going to have a color attribute, what's called a fill. We're going to utilize appropriate layering and organization to create a clean and scalable graphic image. That is what you use vectors for, because vectors can be scaled to any size from the same file. So you need them to be clean, and you need them to communicate clearly, even if they're the size of a postage stamp. We're going to become familiar with layer effect modes. We have looked at blending modes on layers, like multiply versus normal. Layer effect modes, I've shown to a few of you in specialized needs, but that is where you can affect the pixels within the layer in certain ways. Adding drop shadows, adding fills, adding outlines. Okay? And why did I say pixels there? Because we're going to be using the vector shapes within a raster program to start with for this exercise. When we actually design our own vectors out of whole cloth, we'll be using vector designing programs. And then we're going to organize how to organize, change the order, and move vector shapes between smart object layers. All right, let's look at some examples. Remember, you always have the YouTubes from past semesters and right now to help with this. And I'm going to ask you guys to jump in with me. So, we start not from our own imaginations, not from our sketchbooks, but for next class, next week, you do want to have a sketchbook in class, because assignment 1, we start with sketching with our own hand. But here, we're going to use other people's pixels again in a slightly different way. We're going to use other people's pixels from this really low-rent website, which allows us to make free emojis. And we're going to make something that is somehow related to what we want using this free emoji maker tool. And then we are going to recreate it using vector shapes. You can see they're vector shapes because of this blue outline around everything. And then we're going to learn how to modify it and make it better, right? This one I was able to make really match. This is an instructor example. This is for an orc from Lord of the Rings. Right. All right. So the first skill will be able to match the ones we make in this website program, but then we can actually go way beyond it as well if we choose. So what is the first skill? And Rodrigo, you still have enough time to do this to get started on it. The first skill, I'm just going to go right to it, is to take your theme and think about it as an emoji, and then to go right to, I'll go over all this stuff in a little bit, to this step, step 2, and this link, emojimaker.flaticons.com. It's not an important enough site that I have it in the links page. We only use it in this one instance. So everyone should be able to use it today and finished with it today. So how does this work? It's a very simple online tool where you choose your background. If I delete things, right, I can start with the default, and then I can pick poop as my background shape, right? Or I can pick robot, or fire hydrant, or whatever you want to call it, or angel, or Santa, or clean-shaven Santa, whatever it might be. But these are the only options. So they're pretty limited. Notice when you do ghost, you don't see it at all, because this is poorly designed, where the ghost vector shape is the same fill as their background shape. So that I wouldn't choose ghost, but the others are at least a little bit darker, so you can tell what they are. The next thing you can choose, well, I got to think of what my theme is, Aesop's Fable. So what do I want to do? Probably something a little animalish, right? So maybe I'll choose the monkey to start with. Next, this is the only feature that you can only choose one of. This is your base shape. And if vectors are like cutting out pieces of paper, now we can layer lots of like paper doll features onto it. So for eyes, I can choose kind of sly eyes. Now I don't get to change their size. I don't get to change their placement, right? And I can add multiples, so I can add that. And whatever you click last will be layered on top, like sheets of paper that you've cut out. Next, you have mouths. So you guys can be playing with this right now. And sometimes I want like a sly fox, right? So is there something I could use as a nose here? Because you'll see there's quite a few options. And remember, I can use multiples. It's not great, but it's something. Maybe that one. No, I'll go with the other. So I'm going for fox more than monkey. Okay, next you have effects. So I kind of like the idea of an effect on the monkey or on the fox. Let's give whiskers. Maybe, yeah, I think that's about it. Maybe some emotion. And then that's all you can do. So now what do? What I want you to do is to export it and then download it as a PNG and as an SVG. One of those is a vector file. That's the SVG. That stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. From that, I will show you how to organize it. We're going to organize that into our exercise 2 folder. And now I'm done with exercise 1. I can mark that as green. And now I mark exercise 2 as yellow. Where did all of those things I just downloaded from the internet go? They went into my downloads folder. So I want to move those first onto the desktop. Notice the SVG is already different than the PNG. And then keep them there. And then we're going to go from there. All right, now I have downloaded the PNG and the SVG. And if you want an even better version than the exporting gives you, because these are vectors, you can hit Command+ and make that as large on your screen as you can. And notice as you do that, the edges of these vector shapes stay clean. Just like the typeface does, right? Because the type is made out of vector shapes. So now, export doesn't work. Export's always going to give me the same SVG and PNG options, but I can make my own PNG that's a better quality than the one here. If I open it up, the PNG is only that big. So which means if I zoom in on it, I start to see pixels right away. Whereas if I zoom in on the website to where I can make it as large as possible on the screen, and then I do a screen grab of it, I will make my own PNG that's at a higher number of pixels than however the export is coded. So how do I do that? On a Mac, it's Command-Shift-4. It turns your cursor into crosshairs, and we just draw a box around it, and I screwed up. How did I screw up? I cut off the top, right? But I can always do it again. Command-Shift-4. I want to capture all of that big emoji I designed. Now, when you export and download from the internet, it goes to your downloads folder. When you make a targeted screen grab with Command-Shift-4, it goes to your desktop. So remember, function F11 will show you your desktop. So now I'm going to put this file, I'm going to move this one to my downloads folder, pretend, because you're never supposed to move to trash, but I can, right? And now I'm going to look at the difference between this one that I just did as a screen grab and this one that I exported from the site. Because it's a PNG, notice that it supports transparency. You know, it's not in a white box. It's free floating. But this one is a screen grab, so it grabbed all the pixels on the screen, and there's no thing as no pixels on a screen. So it grabbed my image, but it also grabbed those background pixels. But look at the resolution size when I zoom in on the nose of this one. We know it's raster and pixel based. And now look when I zoom in on the nose of this one. See how much cleaner it is. So how can the same image give us both those resolutions? That's because it's a vector shape. Now it's weird. But if I zoom in enough on the screen grab, I also see the pixels. Because the screen is made of pixels, right? So these are both raster images. So they also give you the option of downloading it as an SVG. You do not need to open it because you'll have to sign in to Illustrator. We're going to do that later. But I will open it. Only vector programs can open vector files. You want it that way. Because if other programs could, they would easily overwrite vector files and corrupt them so that the people who really need to use them can't use them. And that happens all the time professionally. Okay, so this is Adobe Illustrator. We'll be using it later in class to make our vectors. How does this look different? It got coded a little wrong because it's a wonky website. But the difference is, if I zoom in on the nose here on this SVG file, no matter how much I zoom in on it, I will never see pixels because vectors are not made of pixels. What are they made of? Well, I click on it. They are made of anchor points and then connecting paths between anchor points that are highlighted in blue here. And those paths can be connected by straight lines or by curved lines, right? And then those vectors can be modified. We'll be learning about all of this. Some of you will hate it, but it's such a good professional skill to have, right? So these curves, or not the curves, the anchor points between the curves can be modified, right? They can be turned to straights. They can be moved. They can be altered, right? So all of a sudden, I can go from a monkey nose to something that's a little bit more complicated, right? So it's like making cutouts of paper with a blade so that there's no pixel edge, right? But you decide how complicated those cutouts are going to be. And then when we actually use this program in the future, there are like really good tools. Like I love this pencil tool with its settings because you can use it almost as magic scissors to say, actually, I want the